I'm going to come out and say it. Rakan should be nerfed. And those nerfs he should receive should be revert on the buffs he received to his Q in patch 13.3. Let me tell you why. Number 1, he reduces his skill floor even further, which completely overshadows his high skill ceiling. So, historically, Rakan has always had a really high skill ceiling. There's a lot of really impressive things you can do in this champion with a lot of nuanced things in his kit, and it's really impressive. Obviously, it takes a lot of practice to do things like that. But also, simultaneously, Rakan has always had this very low skill floor. It's always been very easy to pick up and play Rakan and then never get punished for not being well practiced at him, because you can just use that mobility, that excessive mobility you have, to run away the entire game and never really be punished. There's nothing opponents can really do if you do that. However, you would always contribute very little historically if you were to play like that, because if you want to use your W and your E to run away repeatedly, well, then your Q would contribute very, very little. It used to be one of the worst abilities in the entire game. That is no longer the case after these buffs. It is actually a very good ability now. Unfortunately, there's a buff new ability that made his skill floor even lower, and now I think it has reached a point where Rakan's skill floor is so low that you would never really try to play around Rakan's high skill ceiling and make plays with the champion when you can just abuse his low skill floor. So, that would be that. Number 2, I think these buffs further encouraged anti-fun gameplay of not interacting with your opponents. Because they buffed up Rakan's Q by so much, really now you can't punish the champion at all in laning phase, even though he's supposed to have a really bad laning phase. So if a bad Rakan player wants to never interact in laning phase, but say you land a killer threshold, nice job, man, good stuff. Unfortunately, maybe he'll deal half of Rakan's health, then he will just spam Q and run away over and over and over again. So the idea is that not only is he never ever going to engage on you, but even if you manage to engage on him and find a play on him, he will just spam Q over and over and over again, which has much lower mana cost than it did previously, and lower cooldown than it did previously, and a much bigger heal than it did previously, so now he can just sustain up and never interact with you. So even if you manage to make a play on him, he will use mobility to run away, and then he will just sustain back up to full. That is not fun to verse in the slightest. I'm saying this as a Rakan main, and not just because I'm a Rakan main, I hate watching other people play Rakan, but it is miserable versing Rakan right now. It is not fun at all to verse a champion who never interacts with you in laning phase. Dude, even Janna and Lulu are interacting more in laning phase than Rakan is right now. That is not okay. Going on to the next point. Number 3, this pushes Rakan in an unhealthy direction of becoming an enchanter. And not just these buffs, but especially these buffs, but also the buffs previously. For the last year, Riot has finally realized how terrible Rakan really was and how much help he really needed. And that's awesome. I'm glad they finally figured it out after so many years. However, all these buffs he's been receiving have been primarily to his passive, his Q, and his E. Just all of his enchanter abilities have been buffed over and over and over again because Riot is so concerned about Rakan becoming a meta pro play champion again that they are so beyond scared to buff his W or his R. And I don't think they should buff his ults either, but I do think a small buff to W was the way to go, or even better than that, a bunch of small quality of life changes across all of his abilities would be fantastic. Even quality of life changes across his enchanter abilities would feel better for Rakan mains and be more rewarding for Rakan mains than these buffs that we got. But that's besides the point. All these repeated buffs to Rakan's enchanter elements, his passive, his Q, and his E, have been pushing the champion steadily in a direction of being balanced around being a defensive enchanter, more so than being an engager. And with this last patch, not only do we get another buff to his enchanter abilities, this time his Q by a pretty substantial amount, but also we got W nerfs. We lost base damage on W. Not that that's the end of the world or anything. Damage on a support by the mid to late game doesn't really matter all that much, and obviously the utility matters a lot more than the damage would. But also, we're nerfing Rakan's engage to buff up his enchanter stuff. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Rakan as an enchanter would be very unhealthy because suddenly all of the skill checks that Rakan needs to pass in order to find successful engages and succeed suddenly is no longer the thing you have to do. Suddenly you just sit back and use all your enchanter abilities and never interact with your opponents, and that will be the new successful thing to do, and that is currently what is the case actually. So it pushes Rakan in this unhealthy direction of not interacting with opponents and never ever engaging when they repeatedly just buff his passive Q and E. And that's what's kind of happening. No one wants Rakan to be an enchanter, yet they've only been buffing the champion into becoming an enchanter for steadily over the last year or so. Number 4, this champion primarily, or not champion, these buffs that we got on the Q primarily help new and bad Rakan players, and it feels bad for Rakan mains. So, I say this in the first sentence here in the paragraph as well if you want to read it, but also, I want to say this. Accessibility is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that a champion is more accessible to more people. But I'll be honest, even when Rakan was bottom of the barrel trash for so long, there were Rakan defenders out there who would be like, oh, dude, it doesn't matter how bad he is. He's fun. People would play Rakan just because they liked him. Even if he had a really high skill ceiling and he didn't really contribute a whole lot if you were bad at him, people still played him because he was fun. And that was kind of all the reason that a bad new player really needed, because they don't really care too much about winning. They care about having fun, and that's important in League, right? But it does feel bad that Rakan's play rate has been primarily made up of Rakan mains for the last over, like, really 3 years-ish. And yet here we are, now buffing him for people that aren't even playing him. It just felt like, and I've been saying this a lot on stream, but this felt like buffs by non-Rakan players for non-Rakan players. This makes the champion a lot more accessible to people that wouldn't play him previously, which, like I said, is not necessarily a bad thing, but also when you have this champion who has been marketed as this fun but really high skill ceiling champion, it does feel really disingenuous and really bad for Rakan mains when the champion is now being balanced around being more accessible when you've already put a bunch of time into investing and mastering his skills, his high skill ceiling. So it feels bad for people that have invested time into this champion. Yeah, that's pretty much it. At the last point, number 5, this pushes Rakan in an unhealthy direction of becoming meta. I've been saying this as well for a while, but Rakan should never, ever, ever be a meta or strong champion, ever. He does not fit good into League of Legends as that kind of a champion. Rakan, in my opinion, fits best as a viable, but never meta, underdog champion that needs to outplay his own champion's counterplay elements, as well as his opponents, in order to find success. And I say that literally right here, almost verbatim, right here in the first sentence, if you want to quote that. Because when Rakan is like that, then he must interact with his opponents. He must outplay to find success. And that is his niche. He does not, like, that has been Rakan's thing for a very, very long time. When you overtune Rakan, just like I say in number 1, suddenly you don't have to play around his really high skill ceiling. You can just abuse his really low skill floor, and that's really unhealthy. It's really, really unhealthy. It's not fun to verse, and it's not good champion balance design or balance, whatever. One of the two. It's not good. So Rakan should never ever be meta. He's currently very meta in the support role because of these Q buffs. These Q buffs should be reverted. Rakan should be nerfed, and that nerf should be his Q buff gets reverted. And then obviously the W nerf would also get reverted too, because you lost 20 damage there. Rakan was really, really close before these nerfs to becoming, did I even say that right? He was really, really close to becoming long-term balanced, where honestly they wouldn't have to touch the champion for a very, very long time if they didn't want to, because he was this close to being super balanced, not overwhelming in pro play at all, and then really healthy in solo queue where he had options, but you still had to engage to find success with him. And yet they were this close to making him super balanced long-term. All he had to do was either a very small W buff, like small damage increase or a little bit of mana cost reduction on the W, or a bunch of quality of life changes on things like his E or Q, which I know aren't his enchanter abilities, but it would feel good for everyone regardless, without increasing his power by a whole lot. So, sorry, someone on Steam just went on my Treb deck. Excellent. Thank you. Anyways, that's pretty much gonna wrap it up, but yeah, Rakan should not be meta. These buffs never should have happened. They should be reverted, and I hope Riot is smart enough to be able to take a look at what has happened and say, you know what, we missed a little bit on this shot. That's okay. We will pull it. We'll pull these nerfs. We'll try again. It's a-okay. We'll get them in a much healthier direction that feels rewarding for players that have invested time into the champion without making him too overwhelming in pro, without making him too easy by having too low of a skill floor, without making him too much of an enchanter. They can do this, but they need to revert this buff first. I'm sorry to any people who I've upset, because obviously there's probably a lot of people who are like, oh, but Rakan's finally good now and you want him to be worse, what the hell? But this is best for the champion. He's not in a healthy spot right now. He should be nerfed, and like I said, that nerf should be reverting of the buffs in 13.3 and replaced with quality of life changes across his Q and his E. I have a whole separate video for that if you're curious about quality of life changes, or E, or no, not E, or small W buffs. But that's that. That's why Rakan is now in an unhealthy state, and why these buffs were a bad idea. I hope they do it. For anyone who's actually curious about what's going to happen with Rakan, I'm pretty sure I've been told that Riders are taking a look at nerfing Rakan currently. And the patch is going to be out on Wednesday, which means a little over a week from now, on the 13th or 14th, we will see a patch preview on Twitter from one of the riders, and they will announce a patch preview, and Rakan will be in the nerf category. I'm almost 100% certain, because they've been talking about nerfing him already, so I've heard. So, on the Monday, the 13th, or Tuesday, the 14th, we'll get the detailed version of it, actually. Get confirmation that it's getting nerfed on Monday, and then the actual detailed nerfs on Tuesday. So, we will find out what Rakan is getting nerfed on those days. I'm going to say this right now. If they keep his Q buff, and they nerf his engage, Rakan is a dead champion. Not in terms of how good or bad he is, but in terms of the champion we know and love as Rakan, the high skill ceiling, really mobile, flashy engager. That champion will be dead, and he will just become an enchanter. And for all those Rakan mains who have played him for the same reason that I have, for his engage for the last however many years, we will say sayonara. Probably won't stop playing the champ, but he'll be turned into something that we did not want. So we hope that on those days we see Q nerfs, we just see reverts. Hope Riot is, not overwhelmed with hubris enough to the point that they are unwilling to revert these Q buffs. They just need to revert it and try again. It's a-okay to make a mistake or two, as long as they just admit to it and do the right thing. So we'll see if Rakan gets killed off, or the announcement of him getting killed off on the 13th, more or less the 14th, because that's when we get to see the detailed version. So we look forward to that day and seeing what the future of this champion really has in store. So, anyways, that's pretty much that. Hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Wait, and that's just a theory. Rakan theory. Thanks for watching. That was awful. I'm never doing that again.